There we go. All right. Welcome everyone. I appreciate you guys joining our webinar this afternoon, early afternoon for those of you on the West Coast. We'll do a quick introduction, and then we know everyone's time again is super valuable, so we're just gonna jump right in and dig into the topic today. The main point of today's discussion is going to be around crafting AI policy, but as we're going to discuss, there's a lot of different variations and nuance there. We're going to cover a lot of the different approaches that you could use to this, along with some specific examples. I also did share in the chat a resource document. We'll be sharing that out sporadically, but again, all the resources from today are going to be there. So if you want to bookmark that, add that to your drive. Also, we will be sharing more examples throughout the year. So we do work with a lot of school districts. And as you guys get comfortable sharing out policies, we're going to have a lot more use cases in the K-12 space that we can share. So again, you may want to bookmark that, save it, and then we will be updating that periodically as we get more resources. So, quickly, to introduce myself, my name is Tom Driscoll. I'm the CEO and owner of EdTechTeacher. We're a professional development organization that's been around since 2008, helping teachers thrive in the classroom with educational technologies. Most recently, we've been working with schools across the country and some internationally on everything related to AI and education, from teacher training to working directly with students, crafting AI policy, helping leaders use AI themselves. So we've really been immersed in this over the past few years, and we're happy to share a lot of those ideas with you. A little bit more background. I actually started out my career as a high school social studies teacher in two different public school districts in Connecticut. Started to cut my teeth in educational technology through a degree from Teachers College, and then really started to go down the path of helping educators learn ed tech in all different fronts. I became a digital learning director at a regional school district in Rhode Island, where I helped lead our one-to-one initiative, work closely with the superintendent and school principals on crafting policies and plans. I'm pretty well versed in the policy development process, having gone through it a few times myself. And then most recently moving over to EdTechTeacher full-time, and really I just devote all of my professional life right now to helping teachers and school leaders in the classroom. I am also joined today by Sean McCusker. He actually just jumped off an AI workshop with another school, so he's going to be joining us to add some context and some ideas as well. Sean, I noticed that you did jump in, so if you want to hop in and do a quick intro as well, that would be great.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sean McCusker. Like Tom, we do a lot of working with schools just to help them build effectiveness. I like to tell people we're experts at helping people to be experts. Pretty much all the same. My expertise is in co-taught special education, modified learning for individual students. I was a regular education teacher in a full inclusion special ed environment for every one of the years that I was in the classroom, 25 years in education, and as an administrator and school leader. I also spent a lot of time in alternative night school. So non-traditional learning and adult learning theory is a big part of my thinking as well. The one thing that Tom didn't mention, other than the fact that I'm the secretary of the Illinois Digital Education Association, Tom and I wrote a book together called Becoming Active Citizens. Our side hustle, actually, our passion is civic education, and we wrote a book about creating effective civic education policy within school districts. And we won a National Book Award for that. So I'll pass it back to Tom, but I'll be here and I'll chime in periodically.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Sean. So again, don't be shy. Feel free to jump in at any point in the chat or through audio. Excellent. Thanks, Sean. And I did also, for the folks who just jumped in, I shared our resource document again if you wanted to dive in directly to that. Okay, so the first question is really like why are we here right now? So what is the focus of AI? Why are we spending a lot of time and resources on this concept? And it's really been taking off the past year, frankly, really more like the last 6 months or so. And I think there's a few different factors here. The first one is undeniably AI is impacting the world in profound ways. Everything from the world of work to civic life to how people learn right now, even to how people search for information, right? So one quick example is the idea that the nature of search on the internet is changing, right? And I actually tell my son sometimes, the idea of going to a website or going to a search engine to find a website to find information, they're going to think we were kind of nuts to have to go through all those steps, right? So we're going to think that, oh, you don't just ask a question and get an answer. So even that is shifting underneath our feet where we get information, how we access it. So how do we even think about preparing kids for these new realities that are already taking shape? The second thing is educators all over the world are experimenting with AI tools all of the time. And part of this is so for those of you that are tech directors or have lead rollouts before, what's happened is really the Pandora's box opened at the end of 2022, and this wasn't like a very carefully planned rollout of AI. It just opened up, right? There wasn't like a rollout plan of devices and software. It's just people had access to this stuff, and we were kind of scrambling to figure out the best way to use it. And frankly, the results are mixed. Some use cases are incredible, but some are not. And even educators are saying, this may not be the best way to do this with this particular tool or technology. So the experimentation is already happening in the classroom. And then the third piece is students are already using them. A vast majority of secondary students have used a tool like this. It may not have been in a formal lesson, but they're using them. And let's face it, most of them are not using it in responsible ways. So that is really starting to drive some of the conversation. For better or worse, is that the student use is also something that we need to address. So to recap, it's impacting our world. And if we're preparing kids for the world, that makes sense that we address it. Two, teachers are already using it in wide ranges of use cases, and then students are already using it. So we're going to pause for a second, and we're actually going to start. Just bear with me, and then we're going to jump into the specific action steps. Just take 1 minute in the chat. If you were to pick one benefit that generative AI has in education, what would it be? All right, so 60 seconds on the clock. What would be what you think to be the greatest potential benefit of having generative AI tools as an educator or as a learner?
Tom, I love the drafts of anything that Heatherland put in there. Like the ability to quickly put together a draft is fantastic.
Yeah. Oh, the responses in here are amazing. Awesome. So already, so time saving, that's huge for just about everything. The thought partner, that's brilliant. So whoever put that in, that is, I want to shout that from the rooftops. Think of AI as your own thought partner, right? And we're not going to get too much into the weeds, but one of the people that I follow quite a bit, Ethan Mollick in this space, is he differentiates between AI outputs and AI inputs. AI outputs would be like, just generate a list of this or create a worksheet. That's an output. An input would be like, how might I design this solution to this problem? Where you're actually getting advice and input from AI as a thought partner. So that's definitely something that I'm very much an advocate of. Okay, critical thinking, shifting to creativity, excellent. Okay, ideation. Wow, you guys, all right. So a lot of great stuff. Um, Now, not to preview too much, but this stuff needs to be in your policy, right? So if you're crafting an AI policy, it can't just be a giant list of things you can't do, right? So that's the first thing. What do we want people to use these tools for? What are the benefits? Why is it helpful in education? Now let's pivot to the fun part, right? What are the biggest risks, right? And I'm saying that facetiously, right? What are the biggest, I would say, drawbacks or challenges or risks associated with AI in education? And again, I'll give you guys another 60 seconds. What do you see as the biggest risks that you see in your school district or even in your classroom? Lindy with the SAT vocab word. Excellent. And actually, Sean, I don't know if you want to jump in on this one because you
Yeah,
mentioned
this
this
is
a lot.
this is my jam. I
Yeah,
get frustrated by how AI humanizes itself. When it gets something wrong, if you challenge ChatGPT, it'll be like, "Oh, I'm sorry, on second thought." It's not doing a second thought. It's using a second algorithm. It's choosing a different probability, but it likes to humanize that part, right? And it makes it more okay for it to be wrong, right?
right,
And like human error. And I don't know if it does that to make it seem better, but the anthropomorphism part of it to me is the
yeah,
part that I'm most uncomfortable with all the time when it refers to itself as if it is something other than a mathematical program choosing an answer for you, right? But once you
right.
start looking for that, you'll notice it all the time. And I apologize because it's going to pop up in your head in the next week or so.
Yeah. Yeah, the first time ChatGPT apologized to me, I found it was really weird, right? It's like, wait a minute, like you don't have to apologize. You're an AI tool. So anyway, so I think that that is a big one. So first of all, thanks for joining, Lindy. If anyone doesn't know, Lindy, follow her stuff. She does amazing work. Whatever she does is really good. Okay, so bias, that's another big one. Disinformation, personally identifiable information, the PII. So for all the tech directors, I know what that is. Um, I think that there's a lot to unpack just on the data and security piece. And frankly, that's the main thing that's holding a lot of schools back. Let's just throw it out there. There are a ton of great, safe options right now in the K-12 space. It's relatively limited. That is going to change rapidly. Right. By the start of next school year, you're going to have a lot more options on safe AI tools for students. So I think getting a policy in place is super important. But for right now, not a lot of great options out there. So I think that that's definitely a big risk that we face is what can we use? Okay. So
Let me jump in really
oh
quick.
yeah. Yeah,
One of
yeah.
the things I think is important when I work with this, I was working with a school recently that really struggled getting teachers to want to use AI or to have a policy. Their plan was let's just ban it outright. And like it's a pretty hard starting position. That's a lot of work to be done there. But one of the challenges in moving that their thinking forward is that the focus of their discussions have been all the negatives, and they had never discussed the positive ways that it could help. They never talked about the time savings. They've never talked about the way that it can allow for more differentiation. Like if you've done a lot of differentiation, or if you're a UDL teacher, the time it takes to create versions is the thing that holds you back. But now I can create 5 versions of something with a single prompt. And so now you're talking about the ability to create very specific, unique pathways for students. If you talk about
Mm,
that with teachers, they can get
right.
excited. So make sure that you're not just allowing the conversation to be all that we will lose, all that we are threatened by, all the things that are difficult. All of
Right.
that is real. So don't ignore it either.
Right.
But put it on equal footing with what we stand to gain so that we can navigate this with both in mind. Otherwise, your policy is going to be like um, a watertight uh, policy to keep people away from AI. And that's not going to be really easy. It's going to be within all the tools that we're using.
Right. Right. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So we're not going to belabor the point here. We're gonna move on. But this is just a one graphic from Teach AI. We highly recommend this as one of the go-to resources. We have it in our resource guide. This just kind of goes over a few of the benefits and a few of the risks, but really the point here is in your school community, this has to be a real conversation. And if it drifts just into, oh my God, kids are cheating with AI, and that's all you ever talk about, it's a missed opportunity, right? So there's a lot of other things that we can explore. So make sure that when you design policy and frameworks and guidelines, you're also discussing these other aspects of it and not just only focused on plagiarism. Okay, so um, before we begin, a couple quick things. You may not need an entirely new AI policy, which it might be ironic because you came to an AI policy webinar, but I really don't think all districts need a brand new policy that you pass through your school board. It can be one. Like you can have a devoted AI policy for your school district. And if you want to do that and go down that road, that's great. But I think there's other ways. Like if you need to get something on the books quick, we know official policy is not, there's nothing quick about it, right? And it's also really hard to change. So I think consider weaving these ideas into some of your existing policies, frameworks, and protocols. So for instance, I'm sure you already have a responsible use policy for technology. Maybe you just add some language to that. You already have an academic integrity policy. Maybe you bolster that and add some AI language. You already have a student data privacy guideline for professionals. Add some things to that. Your professional learning plans, you already provide professional learning to your staff. So maybe you adapt it now to include more AI PD. So the point I'm trying to make here is that if creating an entirely new AI policy seems daunting, there are other ways to get this information in there and provide some guidance to your school community. The other thing is, I feel like everybody on this call, if you're in a position where you're helping design policy, it's also a responsibility that you stay up to date and on the front lines of these changes. There are a million things that you can look at online, but here's just one that I recommend. When I want to find out what's new, what are some of the emerging trends, I tend to follow some of the leaders in the space, one of them being Ethan Mollick. He has a Substack, which is basically a newsletter called One Useful Thing. It gives you a lot of up-to-date information on how these things are rapidly shifting. They're not all going to happen in school the next day, but this helps you stay one step ahead of where some of these things are going, right? So it's kind of like the whole hockey, I think it was the Wayne Gretzky thing. You don't skate to where the puck is, you skate to where the puck's going. So it really does help to keep an eye on where these trends are. All right, so let's dig in, right? So step one, we're going to have 8 steps to this. Now, the document that I shared with everyone, just so you guys can see it, we did outline each one of these with some text and also with some resources at the end that we're going to go into. So everything from these slides is also in that resource. Now, the first thing as far as assembling your team, a couple things to consider. When you come up with an AI task force or committee or group, have as much diversity and representation as possible. If it's just a group of 2 administrators that have never used AI before, that haven't been in a classroom in 20 years, it's going to be a really hard sell to push that AI policy to anybody. You're going to need people that are on the front lines, including kids. We actually did a focus group with some students last spring on their use of AI, and it was really eye-opening. And when I shared some of those insights to the school leadership team, they were shocked by some of the things that they heard from their students. You got to talk to the kids. Okay, so however you do it, try to get some feedback from them, and especially from the teachers, right? Because a lot of them are experimenting and they're also seeing some of the risks that AI poses. And then, of course, you need your IT staff, like your IT team, whatever your leadership team is, that they have to have a seat at the table. I've always been an advocate of if you have your leadership team with your superintendent, all that, like you need representation from that IT team there because they're going to be so valuable, important. And I think that having that mix is going to help quite a bit. It's going to create community buy-in and it's going to give you a lot of different perspectives on this rapidly changing um, development. Now, what is one thing that you could do? So, a sample action step in a potential challenge. The first thing is just invite members to participate and have some type of initial meeting and have some goals and timelines. I actually found that the 2 pizza rule kind of applied, right? So if you have more people than you can feed with 2 pizzas, it might be too many. But I think having that group and having some very clear deliverables is so important. I've been in a lot on my side where you go to a committee, you go to a meeting, you talk about stuff. Usually people just complain about things for an hour and then you go home. That is not going to get the job done. So have a team, create some clear benchmarks. This is what we're going to create. This is our deliverable. Give people space to vent and to share, but also you got to get something done. So clearly share that out with folks. Now, here's the challenge with that. Ensuring that you have consistent participation and navigate all those opinions are going to be tough. So, for instance, I was just working with an AI task force for a school, and there was one person on that committee who was really vocal against using any AI tool that assumed the role of a historical figure. And I thought it was a fascinating conversation, and it was great. But we almost took up about a half hour talking about AI as a historical figure, and it's like that's a great conversation, but we need to craft a policy right now. So maybe we talk about that as part of the policy, but I think having a very focused, clear initiative and what we're going to design is going to be really important. Then if you want to dive deeper with smaller focus groups, you can to get feedback. But as far as the team that's actually going to write this policy or get these frameworks together, try to reduce a lot of those different sidebar discussions because this could go in a million directions. You're going to have to be really focused when you develop this one. So you have your team. Now you got to find out where you're at. You need to conduct some type of needs assessment. And a lot of administrators are surprised to see how much AI is already being used on a daily basis in schools, not as much in elementary, but especially at the high school level. Some students are using it almost every single day already. So assess the current usage of generative AI from your staff, from your kids, from families. I just led an AI night, not a tech night recently, and we talked about AI tools. And one teacher actually, one of the parents came up to me and said, they used WhatsApp and they actually search for things now in WhatsApp using the Chat GPT extension. Because so actually, this mom using WhatsApp actually uses Chat GPT all the time. So you may find some interesting use cases there just by talking to families. Anyway, reach out to your families, find out what they're using, what your staff's using, what your kids are using, and that's going to help you figure out what are some of the needs and challenges. So, really easy way to get started is to distribute a survey to your staff, and have them share some of those specific use cases. So, how do you use it, right? That's going to be really important. The other thing is consider using AI tools to help with this, right? So if you have, say, 1,000 survey responses and you're going through every single question one by one of those 1,000, you're not leveraging AI. You could actually use a lot of different tools to go through that data, get some insights, categorize it. So that's for another workshop, but there are a lot of ways that you can do that. Now, here's the potential challenge. Um, some people are not going to admit that they're using it. And there's actually something that's happening across the world right now. They call it like shadow AI usage. So basically, a lot of employees across the world are using AI all the time, but they're not telling their bosses because they're afraid they're going to get in trouble. Well, guess what? That's happening in K-12 schools across the country, probably college level too. A lot of teachers are probably using this rogue. A lot of students that we know are using it rogue. So they may not be too open to sharing exactly how they're using it if, for instance, you've said you can't use any of these tools. So just be mindful of that. So if you've been communicating that using any of this should not be done, and then you ask them, are you using these tools? And they say, we're not using them. Well, no, duh. Because, so I think kind of thinking about how you frame that is going to be really important. And maybe it's more of an anonymous type feedback, but think about how you ask those questions is going to be pretty important how you frame it. All right, the third step, and this is what a lot of people forget and they just skip over, but you need to clearly define like the goals and the purpose for this. And this is where we actually have a lot of examples that we can share with you. And actually, the Teach AI website has a sample purpose and goal statement that you can use, which is really helpful. But I think sharing that is or going through that is going to be really helpful. Okay, so first, why, would you need these guidelines? And I think a well-defined purpose and communicating that to families is going to be really important. Also, how does that support the school's current priorities and initiatives? So, for instance, if you want students to, if one of your goals is to get them to, engage in divergent thinking, to think more critically, to solve problems. Well, you're probably going to want them to use AI responsibly to assist in creative problem solving and then provide some examples. So I think that's going to be an important part of this too, is the purpose of our AI policy is not just to make sure kids don't use AI. It's when they are using it or when educators are using it, it's aligned with our values and our vision. If that's missing from your AI policy, I think that might be a starting point. Like, what is the why? And clearly articulating how these tools can help enhance instruction just as much as we need to mitigate some of the potential risks. Okay, so one example would just be to draft out a purpose statement outlining ethical and educational principles that are going to guide the use. I think we can all agree that like an outright ban of any AI in any instance is not feasible. Partly because a lot of the AI, the educational tools that you already have subscriptions to are going to have AI baked into it. Actually, Google Workspace has had AI baked into it for the past decade, right? So you're already using AI across the board in a lot of these ed tech. So we're not banning it. But when we do use it, is it used ethically? Is it used responsibly? And what does that look like? Now, here's the potential barrier to this balancing innovation with some of the caution, right? So you want to try to get some consensus around this, but there is going to be that push and pull, and that's perfectly normal. That's healthy. But trying to balance that might be a little tricky with the drafting of this, but I think having that conversation is certainly worthwhile.
Tom, here's a good place to bring out the idea of transparency. If
Yep.
when you get started doing this in your purpose and goals, you create transparent usage, it's very easy to have a discussion about the ethics, morality, and appropriateness of AI use if we're all allowed to say what we're using. If you
Yep.
drive AI use into the shadows, people are going to be using it for things, and we won't be able to reflect and evaluate like the ethical nature of their use. Also, we want students to tell us when they're using AI. And if you want that to happen, teachers are going to have to live by that code too and share when they use it. So if we want students to always say, I used AI in this way so that we can interrogate that use, we also, as teachers, have to be sharing, I used AI in this way to create these materials and be very open about that process. If you have transparency, you can talk about the values that your school stands behind. If you don't, those things are going to exist in like the shadow world that we talked about, and it's going to be really hard to evaluate them and build a consensus as to what's right and what's wrong.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's certainly a big part of this, and I think you can also get a head start with some of the language because sometimes people kind of get stuck on that blank page, right? So, I did put a link in our resources. So if you go to the resource doc towards the bottom, a lot of people have seen this one before, but I think it's still one of the best ones out there. Teach AI put out some guidance, and they put some guiding principles and even like a sample purpose statement. So feel free to go in, adapt some of this language. There's a lot of examples out there like this, but I wouldn't just do the whole copy and paste job. You want this to be yours. You want your community to own this, but you can use some of these as a guide. Okay, so this kind of gets to the heart of it. I think I keep doing that instead of slideshow. Um, there are three main parts of what needs to be in this policy from my perspective. The first is, what does responsible, ethical, safe use look like? Right. So that's kind of the academic integrity, like that piece of it. Then the student data privacy, which we're going to get to in a second. And then after that, you have all this on the plate. How do people learn about this stuff? Right. So that's kind of the learning and training. But let's go step by step. So four, you need those guidelines for what does good look like? What does responsible use look like? And I was the first to really shift my way of thinking about some of these different guys. And actually, I'm going to give a shout out to Tom Murray. He actually, if anyone's familiar with him, he does a lot of work with future ready schools, among other things. And he came to our district. Actually, he was speaking at the Rhode Island EdTech conference, which they don't have anymore. But anyway, so he was there. And I was in the middle of a process in my school district where we were revising our acceptable use policy. And essentially, I looked at it, and it was a huge list of just things that you can't do as a student. And he was the first one that really told me, he was like, no, this should be about a responsible. He's like, what should be using tech to do? So I think creating this to also be what should be doing, not just what we shouldn't be doing, is going to be important. So what you need to do is define some specific and clear guidelines for what constitutes acceptable and prohibited AI use for students, teachers, and staff. Provide examples to illustrate these. Once we go through the steps, I'm going to share over some resources that give you some example language around this. But again, that's going to be something that you and your school community are going to have to talk about. Just for instance, the school that I was just working with was really against the idea of using like an AI chatbot that assumes the role of, say, a historical figure. But that's just that's their approach. There might be another school that says, hey, that's a great use. That's a way to engage students. So there's going to be a lot of values baked into this. So try to think through what does that look like here, and try to reduce as much ambiguity as possible, because that's the biggest problem. When we talk to teachers, the biggest challenge they face a lot of times that they share with us is that they're not quite sure. They're not quite sure what they should be using. Their kids aren't quite sure what they would be using. So their default is just say, all right, nothing. And I don't really blame them for that, right? So if they're flying blind and there's no guidance, a lot of times they're just going to say, you know what, I'm just not even going to risk it. Especially if there's news reports about all kind of heck breaking loose with AI. It's kind of a natural reaction to it. So here's the action to take. Create a document with your district where you just list as many examples as you can of what does acceptable or responsible use look like. What is a scenario? Right. And I suggest also doing it, K to 12, like an elementary use case. That might be more of like a teacher modeling something as a class activity, for instance. You're not going to put a kindergartner on an AI tool with their own account, for instance. But have those use cases. What does it look like across the span of when they're in your school district? Now, the challenge of that is, how do you keep them specific enough knowing that this is going to change rapidly? So that's why I would say I wouldn't necessarily put super specific things in like a policy guide that's going to be on the books for the next 10 years. That would be more of like an addendum or a resource with it. But try to provide as many use cases as you can, and then revise and update it. We'll talk about that towards the end, but this is going to change so fast. And as I mentioned, some of the big players in EdTech are going to have all these AI tools built in the next year. So think about how you'd want to set that up and provide that to staff.
Tom, another example of that is do
Mhm.
the mental exercise of, if you were to ban AI entirely, you wouldn't have anything left. Spell check, autocorrect. Google has AI tools throughout it. Um,
Yeah.
that would cover a lot of things. So your language has to be careful so as not to accidentally ban things that are accepted and useful within the school.
Right. Yeah, because you may unknowingly. Well, here's the other big thing: accessibility tools. We didn't even talk about that. There are some unbelievable AI-powered accessibility tools out there that are giving kids access to education that they've never had before. You can't just rip that out of their hands, right? So I think that that's another thing that we need to be mindful of, is that there's a lot of students that are already relying on this for some pretty amazing ways. Okay, so this is the $1 million question, right? So how do you write with AI? So we have a lot of resources to share with you on that. We have a whole list of them, but here's a quick preview. The first one is, show them how to cite it properly. And we work with a lot of social studies and ELA teachers at the secondary level, and I'll show them these resources. Sean, I know if you've experienced this too, but they're like shocked that there's even a guide to cite them. They didn't even know that you could do that. And there is. So there's actually MLA, APA, Chicago. They all have websites and style guides for how you can properly cite generative AI tools in your research. So that this could just be a really quick one to not only show educators how you can do this the right way, but even just open their minds that no, this is acceptable. Like in higher ed, in the world of research, people are using AI tools all the time as part of the research process. So how do they do that in a responsible way, and how can we model that and prepare them? And
And
I
Tom,
talked
that's
to
another
yeah,
example of how you have policies already that can
mhm,
help you in the
yeah,
absence of your larger policy. So if you
right,
have the rule that if you use AI, you must cite it, maybe a kid didn't know that it was wrong to use an AI tool. And maybe they can argue that with their parent if they're called upon for like something about academic dishonesty, but they did know that they had to cite their sources. So you have a
yes,
completely different policy in place that serves the purpose of keeping academic integrity, that doesn't fall upon the idea that you never explicitly said this tool or that tool is all right. You
right,
have to cite the sources that you've used, and that can
right,
be a catch-all for a lot of the like the initial challenges that might arise as you're building your school policies.
right. Yeah, and I don't want to get into any of the specifics, but there was a school recently or a district that got it, is having issues right now with the idea of a student using it, and was it communicated that they could, so it turns into kind of a mess if you don't have something on the books on this front. So even if you don't get a full AI policy, I would say step one, like tomorrow, make sure you have something in there in your academic integrity policy, or revise that or make an addendum or something where if they're using generative AI sources, they have to cite them, right? That should be a non-negotiable for any school district as far as I'm concerned, because that's how you properly research in general, not just about AI, just you should cite your sources. Like I'm a former social studies teacher, like it's really important to do that. So showing them how to cite generative AI sources is really important. It should be taught just like any other way. Okay, so a couple initial thoughts here on addressing AI plagiarism. And I know this is kind of a hot button issue, but um, so I think first, you got to be direct and set some clear expectations. These kids, a lot of times they'll have seven different teachers. You can't all have a different set of expectations. It's the same thing. Think about your cell phone policies, right? You all know you have the teachers that let them talk all day long, and then some teachers that are taking it and putting it in the plastic bags. That's not a good way to run any type of policy, whether it's a cell phone or it's an AI policy. So you got to have the clear expectations. The second thing is the AI software that flags AI writing is not accurate. You can use that as a tool, but please, please do not use that as the only instrument you're using to flag that a student cheated.
I
They're only 80% accurate at best, and that's a
I just
high
read a
number.
research report
Yeah.
that said that the best tool, the one that's the most commonly used, is 66% accurate in the most recent two studies that they did.
Yeah, that's horrible, right? So you can't something that to, a third of the time is completely wrong. You can't use that as your tool to see if they're cheating, right? So that's first off. Second, there's also some research that shows that it flags certain student populations more than others. For instance, students that are English language learners tend to get flagged falsely at a higher rate than other students. So there are a lot of issues with the AI detection software. So I would say use that as one of many tools, but you cannot necessarily use that as the evidence. And I would also suggest don't invest a ton of money in that. I mean, maybe some of you guys have already bought a lot of software, but there's a lot of things that you can invest in as a school district. Investing in a software that is wrong a third of the time and can falsely flag students of cheating, probably not your best investment. But again, that's just my take. All right, so third is that when students do make a mistake, view it as an opportunity to teach, not to punish. That's kind of a philosophical thing. And then here's the last part is like the idea of expressing your thinking, right? So writing to clarify thinking. What is the purpose of writing this paper? What is the purpose of doing this assignment? Like clarify the purpose. So we're actually going to talk about instructional design a little bit later. Oh man, I got to speed things up. Um, so, but we do have some examples and some recommendations that we can share on how we can redesign the assignment itself to help reduce some of that. Now, that's beyond the scope of an AI policy, but just something to think about for implementation. All right, step five, addressing data privacy and security. This is a big one. You need to have some type of protocols, right? Um, to safeguard some of that student data, staff and student data. Vet all of the AI tools for compliance with data security and student privacy laws. I know it's a pain in the butt, but you guys, this is really important. And what's happening is with the explosion of AI tools that are targeting teachers right now with their marketing, they're coming right for the teachers. And what's happening is as they're experimenting in the classroom, they may unknowingly be sharing a lot of student data into these systems. So before you have teachers share out strategies and thoughts and tools, like have some type of guidance on that because that is really important. One, it's going to maintain some trust because if you have people in the community that don't think that the students' information is safe and secure, they're not going to trust any AI policy. They need to know that that's safe. And then it's the law. There's legal compliance here. So one of the first things that I tell districts when they're asking about the AI tools they should or shouldn't use, the first thing is it designed for student use? You know, is it 13 plus? Is it 18 plus? Is there any way to get a student data privacy agreement? And if not, I mean, to me, that's kind of a deal breaker, right? So, and that's where when I started, I said we're kind of in this weird point where there's a lot of experimentation, but not a ton of safe tools yet. That's where we have this weird gap, and it's frustrating as heck, trust me. But there is that gap that's still there, so you really need to look through what is a safe tool. So the actions to take is work with the appropriate stakeholders. This is where you got to lean on your IT team, your instructional coaches, your teacher leaders. They're the ones that are on the front lines of the new ed tech. Bring them into the process. Also, think about third-party student privacy groups. So I've actually talked with a lot of schools that are part of, say, for instance, Student Data Privacy Consortium, or they have like a legal team where they have a group of like 10 school districts all have the same legal team they consult with for these types of things. Because again, a lot of schools, you don't have your own lawyer necessarily that can look at all this stuff. So if you can work with any resources you have to come up with a list of approved AI tools that meet security standards and provide guidance, that would be great. I know Common Sense Media is also coming up with a new platform where they're vetting resources. Um, there's a lot of different groups out there, but you have to have some type of structure regardless of the format you use. The challenge here is that continuously monitoring them for compliance is tough. And also updating that list continuously is going to be really hard. So I would say out of the AI startups that teachers are using right now, within 5 years, at least two-thirds of them will be gone, right? So think about that for a second before you start like investing in all of these things. Think through which ones you really want to lean into because a lot of these are going to change. Frankly, a lot of them are going to be gone in a couple of years anyway. So that is going to be one of the challenges that you face on this front. My 2 cents, guys, is it's not going to be 100 tiny little AI apps. The big players are going to integrate these AI tools into theirs. That's just what's going to happen. So it's really more about how do you use these, and then once the big players get more involved, then you know how to do it. I wouldn't go crazy chasing 100 different AI apps. It just doesn't make sense. Okay, so step 6, develop plans for professional learning and support. An AI policy is meaningless if nobody understands it. Nobody understands AI. Nobody can teach with it. Students know how to learn with it. You need to provide that support, right? So this makes it so that it goes from a piece of paper to something that people can actually apply and use on a day-to-day basis. So the first thing is how can you design learning opportunities for your staff, for your students, and for your parents of the different capabilities of AI, the limitations of it, the ethics behind it, have some ongoing resources and support as this technology evolves, if anything, just to ease some of the anxiety around some of these changes. Now, having these opportunities, it's going to make it so that your teachers are more confident using this, that your students know that they're using it in responsible ways to enhance their learning process. It just makes a lot of sense. And it's going to help take this policy and make it actionable in your school district. So, a couple things to keep in mind. First, have variety, right? Especially if you have a large school district, you're going to need to think creatively here. We know PD budgets are tight. We know that time with teachers is very limited. So we always suggest having a variety, whether it's live on-site workshops, self-paced virtual, informal meetups, family nights. You can't have a one-size-fits-all approach. I mean, you could if you're a smaller district, but with bigger districts, it's a little harder. So try to provide as many unique opportunities as you can, preferably for teachers in smaller cohorts. Like, an auditorium with 300 teachers learning about AI for a half hour, I guess it's okay, but it ain't going to cut it. Really, it needs to be smaller groups of teachers that are iterating and experimenting on the ground over a length of time on these strategies. It can't just be like a one-stop shop. They have to keep learning and evolving their practice. Now, the challenge to that is designing and implement these is not easy, right? So you're going to have a wide variety of teachers. I mean, some are still just getting the hang of using Google Drive, and now we're throwing AI tools at them. There's a big gap, right? So think through how do you address the skill sets and the competencies of the different educators you're working with, and think about how you can also align this to other priorities. So, for instance, you don't need to make this an AI initiative. You're already doing like a PBL initiatives. How can AI support project-based learning? If you're doing a universal design initiative, how could AI support inclusion and differentiation and accessibility? Align this to your current initiatives. That will save you a lot of time, especially with professional development. You don't have to change all your PD plans. Just use this and align it with the current PD initiatives that you have. That's usually going to be the best way to get this on the ground quickly. All right, so step seven, that's you have your plan, you've designed it. How do you communicate that out clearly and concisely with your stakeholders? Now, this one's pretty straightforward. We don't need to spend a lot of time here, but take your plan and try to communicate it in different formats. So, infographics, FAQs, presentations, the more formats you can, the better. And here's a tip. I was actually working with a school district a couple weeks ago. They took their AI policy, they used Notebook LM. If you don't know what that is, right after this webinar, go check it out. They basically added their policy into Notebook LM. They changed the language so it could be, what's a version appropriate for K to 5 students, for 6 to 12, parent-friendly version, translated. How do you turn this, make it an FAQ? So it took their whole policy and turned it into a 10-question FAQ document. So use AI tools to actually speed up the process of creating these materials. Then also visuals are really important. Visual communication means more now than it ever has. I hate the term now more than ever. That's the most overused term ever in the history of the world. But I think this is important. How do you create maybe some quick videos, a quick tutorial, something that you can share out that's easy to digest and visual? Because again, just sharing out a 100-page policy document, no one's going to read it. So you need to come through with different ways that you can communicate that and build some trust with your stakeholders. So sample action step, just start by trying to make a one pager. Can you make a one pager infographic with the key points of your policy? Right, that'll actually be a good exercise on how to be concise and clear in your messaging. Then think about distribution channels. Do you do it through email, newsletters, posters on the wall? Everyone loves posters in schools. Social media campaigns, whatever it is. Start with one thing, whether it's an infographic or an email news in a newsletter. Just to start someplace and then communicate it. The challenge is you're communicating some things to a non-technical audience. A lot of them have very limited to no experience with generative AI. So you're gonna have to think very hard about how do you craft that message so that it's not overly technical, but still gets the point across. I would say if you had to err on the side of anything, try to be more general than not, because I think once you get really into the weeds on AI, you lose people. So I think that's something to really consider. All right, and last one, I'll go through this super fast because this is a little bit more of an obvious one, but implementing and refining, right? So you have your policy. How do you finalize and integrate it and refine it over time? So institutionalizing is important. Make sure that your school community knows that you're taking this seriously and you're valuing it. And then over time, you refine that guidance and the protocols through some of the guidance from your task force and your leadership group. So here's a sample action to take. Include all the relevant elements of your AI policy and weave it into your staff and student handbooks. If you have a staff and student handbook that talks about academic integrity, put in the part about your AI policy there. So basically, find those entry points that you can already start to weave this language in. That's not going to be a huge, heavy lift. The challenge there is that ensuring sustained adherence to the policy and also making sure it keeps paces with the advances. Like this is something that's going to be constantly shifting. So making sure that your team doesn't just meet and then in February, like, all right, we're done. We'll come back in 3 years for our next strategic plan. No way. Like that is not like you're going to need to come back and keep revisiting this over time. Okay, so call to action. We're going to come back to this in a second. I want to share a couple other things in our resource document, and then we will have some time to open it up to questions if you guys have some. So in the document, we do have a few things we want to point out as far as follow-up resources. So we highlighted all of those steps. Then we have some resources from our team, and then some other ones that we found just through research that we think are really helpful. The first few here are from us. So we have an AI summit coming up next spring at Bentley University, Massachusetts. It's our second one. We had one last year. It was an amazing event. We highly suggest you guys register and come to that. And if you want to sneak in a call for proposals, we'll still accept some. So if you want to present, feel free to share that. We also have a new membership service that has a lot of AI courses for teachers that are going to be in. That launches December 1st. It's a self-paced online courses with live instruction from our EdTechTeacher team. If you're interested in that for your instructional coaches or some of your leaders, just to kind of get in there and learn as much as they possibly can about AI in schools, we would love to have them as founding members in our cohort. I also put together a new workshop for school leaders on how you can use AI yourself to help enhance your own communication, streamline your processes, design solutions. So we're working with a group in a couple weeks on that. If you're interested, reach out and we'd love to run that for you and your leadership team. And then also some more AI workshops and offerings here in our free newsletter. Okay, so here are some other things that I think would be super helpful. One, I really like the AI guidance from Washington State. If you want to take a look at some of theirs, they have one called Human-Centered Guidance. Now, admittedly, there's a ton of these out there, but I just put the ones that really hit home for us. I love their framework on this one of the human AI human, right? So the HAIH, starting with that human challenge or inquiry, AI kind of assists in that messy middle, and then we have that human reflection at the end. So you don't have to use that framework, but I just love how they tried to make a graphic. They tried to communicate it clearly. This is a state level document, right? So it's guidance. It's not one school policy, but I think it's a good one to take a look at just for some ideas on how you refine the language. They also have one UNESCO guidance for policymakers on AI. This is a deeper dive, but if you wanted to take this, say throw it into Notebook LM, find some of the main points from that research. A lot of good stuff here on AI and equity and inclusivity. I think it's really important. Then, if you want a very specific sample guidance on a school-based document, the Teach AI resource in that toolkit actually has a Google Doc that you can download and actually use that as a starting point for crafting yours. So I know a lot of districts that have done that as a starting point. Again, you don't want to just copy and paste the thing, but it might be something to get started. Now, the next few here is this is interesting. This is about writing, right? So this is actually a guide from University of Illinois, and it goes through everything you think about as far as AI and writing tools. So why would they even use AI tools to write in the class? What are some concerns about writing? How would you approach it in your classroom? Now, granted, a lot of these resources I'm sharing are for higher ed, because a lot of the stuff in K-12 hasn't really been designed and developed yet. So keep that in mind, but it does give you a good example of how you can craft this for, the responsible use and what that could look like in the classroom. A couple other examples. They have one on how to think about generative AI and writing assignments. This is actually from the Harvard University Writing Center. They published this on their website, but they went through some three high-level principles on AI and student writing assignments. But this is what I like most about this resource. It actually goes through the type of writing that you want them to do and then how you could incorporate AI. So, for instance, they're identifying a key issue in a reading, how you could incorporate AI, other ways to assess without AI, and then what scaffolding. So, again, not that you have to take this word for word, but I think it's a good way to say, hey, maybe our school districts could create a chart like this, where if you're creating this type of writing, this is how you could use AI. This is how you could use it without AI, right? So think of how you might be able to use a resource like this. This is a link to the one useful thing newsletter that I was mentioning. And then these are the links to the generative AI style guide. So MLA, APA in Chicago. And if you really want to get deep into the academic integrity debate argument issue, we put three here. One's from University of Chicago, one's from Cornell, one's from George Mason, but they go through every possible stance on this from students using it, what are the best use cases, what are not good use cases, how do you design lessons, how do you communicate policy, all of that's really in there, and that's a deep dive. And then I didn't put any K-12 school policies in here on purpose. A lot of the school districts we're working with are still crafting it. It's still in developmental stage. And frankly, a lot of school districts aren't even publishing it on their websites for a variety of reasons. So if you're on this call and you would be willing to share your school policy, please email us at admin@edtechteacher. If you're willing to share with the people on this call, we will add them to this document. I'm sure some folks are looking for some nice K-12 examples. I'll be adding some in after as well. From the New England area, I have a few school districts that are already said that they could share it with us, so I'll be adding to it. But if you have yours and you're willing to share, we're going to be adding a policy section at the bottom just for some samples that you guys can access. All right, so we do have a few minutes left before we do our final call to action. I do want to kind of stop our share. pop back out, and then see if anybody in the audience has any questions. So feel free in the chat. If you have anything that you would like to ask me, Sean, or anyone else in the group, feel free to add that on in.
Tom, we've got a question in there
Hmm.
asking any suggestions for tools to introduce safe usage to K through 12?
Oh, you know what, Sean, how about that K-12 AI framework?
The AI for K-12
AI for K-12. Yeah, let me
has a
pull that up.
great tool to introduce concepts of AI. And if you're really interested in it, yes, you should look at that. It has a breakdown of what AI competencies can be taught at every grade level, broken down by section K through 2, 2 through 5, 5 through 8, and then high school as well. Um, Tom, if you want to take that next
Yeah,
question, I will go and try and find a link for Anders.
just got it. Okay. Yeah, so check out that AI for K-12 framework. I like it because it does break down how students can learn and use AI from kindergarten all the way up to grade 12. I think it's a fantastic resource. Now, implementing that across the board in your curriculum is another story. That might be a little harder, but I think it is a great resource. Hopefully that can be helpful. Um, Lindy also mentioned a couple other good ones. So, School AI, Google's Teachable Machine, Quick Draw, those are all great tools. I mean, if we're going to go down the AI tool front, the big one out there is Magic School. It's hard to deny. Like that one's got a lot of traction. There is a student friendly version of that, School AI for students. Um, and also, I can't. One of the best tools out there that's free for K-12, that's safe for K-12 use is Adobe Express. So if you want to do any generative image creation, that's safe to use Adobe Express, right? It is compliant. It doesn't train on other people's stuff. So that's another one that I highly suggest for any type of student use. And they
If you
actually have
want some
specific lessons on that too.
old school Padlet users, Padlet has a great text to
Yes.
image process too that's within
Yeah.
their terms of use. So if your school has been using Padlet before, that's a great way to give that one a whirl. Simple, easy to use.
Yeah, and I think that a good way to get started with AI is through the image creation, right? So I've known a lot of teachers, especially in the elementary level, when you're just starting to get kids to learn about it, using like for instance, like Sean, you've done a lot of this before where you're trying to teach like creative writing or descriptive
Yep.
language. You can use a lot of these AI tools as a really interesting piece to those lessons.
Image
Um,
creators are great for creating, teaching
yep.
about bias as well. You can see bias in images so much faster than you can within text. Text is words, you have
Mm,
to dig and look, it takes a process. But you can
mm,
see ethnic and bias. You can see the way that different ethnic groups are represented or included within images. There's a
right.
great article about that from about stable diffusion that I'll drop into the chat. So if you want to read more about the biases within it, and there's another article about how AI becomes racist, but it talks about the ability to evaluate that using images better than with text. So that's a good direction to go for that.
Oh, and Lindy also mentioned she has a good example of Padlet and literature. Lindy, I don't know if you're on the audio, if you can maybe share about it, or maybe even put the link in.
I'm
Um,
trying to find it.
okay,
Heck, I'll add the link to the chat.
okay. You know what? And if Lindy can't find it now, we'll add it to the resource document after. Okay, so we'll definitely do that. Excellent. All right, so we are just about at the top of the hour, so in respect of everybody's time, we're gonna close it out now. If at any point you have any questions, you want to follow up with us, I'm Driscoll at edtechteacher.org. You could also reach out to my colleague Sean, he's McCusker at edtechteacher.org or admin at edtechteacher.org. We'd be happy to help you. Also, one last takeaway here, right? So we like to share this with everybody is you got to get started, right? So begin the process. Start developing your policy guidance, your frameworks. Find a thought partner in your school district. Maybe it's a neighboring district or someone across the country. And then you can always reach out and work with us. We're always here to help. So again, if you're interested in having us provide some guidance or just give you some feedback on what you guys are working on, feel free to reach out anytime. Then also just a last quick shout out to some things that we have cooking. That new workshop that I mentioned, it's designed for school leaders and administrators. Basically, I help you use AI tools to help you with efficiency, make decision-making strategies, sessions more streamlined and efficient, enhance your communications, professional, so a whole bunch of different things. But it's really designed for how can you use AI in your own role to help enhance your leadership skills. We have our summit on March 11th. Go to edtechteacher.org/AI summit. It's going to be here in Massachusetts. We're looking for some more proposals. So if you're interested, the call for proposal form is still on that sheet. Our new membership, I am so excited about this. This is launching in a couple weeks, so we'd love to have you as a founding member. So edtechteacher.org/member. And lastly, join our newsletter. Tons of free stuff. We're sending them out around twice a month now. Even more content coming out than we have in the past. So feel free to join our free newsletter for all of this sent right to your inbox. All right. With that said, I want to thank everybody for being on the call. We do have a feedback form. I'll put that in the chat, but also if you guys can access it at some point through the resource document, I'll add it in there as well. And thank you all very much. And I hope you have a great night and great rest of the school year. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, Sean, we can stop the recording. Get a chance.